Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our session. We're going to be talking about insider threats. This is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation as we hear more and more about breaches today. Thanks to my marketing department, we get the clever little title of Malice, Mistakes, and Mountain Lions. So we'll get to go through and see how all of that fits into insider threats. Actually, let me back up for just a second. We're here with Entisys. My name is Mike McCabe with Varonis, Manager of Sales Engineering for the state, local, and education vertical. We've got our value-added reseller, which is Entisys. One thing that I do want to bring up now, which we can talk about more at the end, is there are security assessments that are available for you guys, free of charge. I think it's an eye-opening experience to get to see what exactly all of the employees in your organization have access to in regards to data, and especially when it gets down to sensitive data as well. So my name again, Michael McCabe, Manager of Sales Engineering for State, Local, and Education. Email address, if there's any other questions after the fact, feel free to send me an email. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions for you guys. The agenda for today is to kind of look at the anatomy of insider breaches. How is it happening? Who's doing it, right? And of course, why is it happening? And then we're going to talk about some of the real world breaches that have taken place. I think Target's probably one that we all know about. Home Depot is probably another one, just to name some of the bigger names there. And then talk about some of our irrational biases around risk, things that we take for granted, and then of course some of the extreme things that we don't even think twice about. So. And then, of course, 6 tips for mitigating insider threat. And all of that will, like I said, make a lot more sense as we kind of get through the information here. All right, insider threats, looking at it from the actors. We've got a couple of key players, and I think it's typically these folks that are going to be going in and actually getting to the data that's on your network. The turncloak, the person who might be disgruntled with being passed up for a promotion, or maybe they didn't get the pay raise that they thought they deserved. And so now they're going to take the opportunity to better themselves, maybe monetarily, by getting a hold of some of the information that's available to them on the network, sell it off, right? The highest bidder, or I guess Sony, and all that information as well. And then we've got the pawn, the happy-go-lucky, do-gooder, brown noser, whatever you want to call it. He's probably got everything set up on his desk, all of the accessories, because he's sucking up to the boss and making the boss make sure he's got everything he needs. So those 6 screens that he's got on his desk, of which he probably spends most of his time playing Candy Crush, right? Not doing any work. Easily socially engineered, lobbing a phone call to him. Hey, this is John. I need access to some information. Oh, sure. Hey, no problem. More than happy to help. And he just turned over information that he probably shouldn't have. But he had access to that information to begin with. And then, of course, the imposter themselves, the folks who are actually coming in maliciously trying to get to that data. They're getting more and more intelligent. The attacks are becoming more and more complex. I think the most recent one that I heard had to do, and I like to golf, so this one really kind of piqued my interest. The folks that were coming into this network found the person that they needed to, the account that they needed to compromise. They knew exactly who they needed to go after. Found out that he was an avid golfer. I think Pebble Beach is, a little further south, but they found out that if we send him an email with an invitation, certificate to go golfing, I'll bet you he opens up that email. And that's exactly what they ended up doing and got him to click through on the email. I'd love to tell you that I wanted to click through if I had a free offer to play Pebble Beach. But, I usually don't click through on that stuff. But they're able to get in here. 6 months, a year and a half, these folks are going in trying to get into the network. Once they get in, you're not always going to see a huge spike in activity. They're intelligent, right? Even though they might be 15-year-olds in the Eastern Bloc. They know what they're doing. So what does the script look like? Once they get inside, what are they doing? Obviously, getting into the network, if they're not already there. And I think that's the scary part, right? Today, we think we're secure. We've got, it's the onion security model, right? Layer after layer after layer of security. And I'm not here to tell you that perimeter security is not important. It is, right? But what happens when they get through those layers of security? The GUI core, if you will, remains completely and totally unprotected. And so what do we do in a situation like that? How do we protect that? Once they're in, they got to snoop around, right? They got to figure out exactly where the data is that they're after. This PowerShell script down at the bottom, and do feel free if you guys want to take a quick picture of that. This script does work. What it's going to do is it's going to go out and find any credit card numbers that are on your network. If anybody enhances their Christmas shopping because of this, I don't want to be involved with that. But this information, it's on the network, right? We know that every organization has to have this type of data on their network, whether it's to simplify their everyday job, or it's to process credit cards for, business transactions that they're dealing with. The question is that information secure? I think that should be a big question. And I think that especially with state agencies, the type of information that you guys are privy to, we've got to make sure that it's locked down to the right people. So of course they're snooping around. What information can they get to? They find the credit card information. Now they've got to get it off the network. That exfiltration process typically is what's going to tip people off, right? Security folks that are in here, you know that as soon as that activity starts to generate, I would hope that's going to start to raise some red flags. But how do we find out that that's happening? What sort of mechanisms are in place to make sure that we're catching all of that? Bless you. So the new normal, again, secure perimeter. Too many networks have been breached. We know that there are vulnerabilities, and they're going to figure out how to get into the latest flavor of the month, if you will, for that perimeter security. Those actors that we talked about before, the phishing attacks. I mean, I think last I heard you can buy a phishing kit for about $1,500, and it will randomly go out there and do the phishing attacks for you. It's just a box, and it does all of that automated for you. I don't know why I know that. I think it was an article that I read, but it's out there and it's available. And I heard somebody just lip that it's free as well. Yeah, it is. So let's talk about the access that you have information to, the access that the employees in your organization have access to. The unstructured data, which Gartner says that's 80% of the information that's on your network. That's where the majority of that sensitive data is going to sit. Traditionally, it's a huge blind spot for IT. Yes, you've got applications to go through. You can do your ERP, your all of the accounting software that's taking place. But the second they decide to export that into a report, what format does that really go into? CSV, Excel, PDF? That's that unstructured data. And then now it gets dropped out onto the network. Who has access to it? Who put it out there? Where is it? And again, we within IT have a difficult time finding where that information sits. Really, who put it out there? Just because they're the author of the document doesn't necessarily mean they're the ones that did that. Also being able to have the ability to go and as they're going out searching for data, how do you know that that's taking place? We're going to talk more about user behavior analytics. Again, this is becoming a very big buzzword in the industry. It's something we've been doing for years within our application, but actually being able to put a title around that and actually give you some metrics and automation that goes into being able to see what individual users are doing, if they hit a certain level of activity, what action do we want to take. So target is a target. Nice play on words, right? I think more seriously, though, 40 million records lost. I think this example has been out long enough that you guys probably all have heard how that took place. Anybody unfamiliar with how that breach happened? HVAC, third-party company, HVAC, they actually had access to the data. Third-party company. I would hope that if there's any contractors on your network that they're pretty restricted to the data that they have access to, and they were able to get to all that information. Now, the sad part, in my opinion, is that Target has their insurance policy, right? And probably of the, and I forget how many millions of dollars it costs them, I think it was maybe a $2 million deductible that they had to pay. But think about the cost that goes back to us, right? I remember getting my new bank card because they were afraid that my account had been compromised because of that. I love my son, but I know that the first day he gets his first credit card, this is what's going to happen. Or he's going to at least try to do that, and I hope to stop that. We're our own worst enemy, right? I can make out most of the numbers on that card, and I'm sure if you guys walked right up to the screen, you can make out the whole credit card number. It's out there. It's out there forever, you guys, right? Anything on the internet, it's there forever. But what does that mean? Let's take away the credit card, picture of the credit card. Let's look at some of the web config files that are out there. Somebody who accidentally puts a file in the wrong location that's out on a web server, right? It's happened. Education spaces, it's happened numerous times. It's a simple slip of the finger. You accidentally drag that file to the wrong location. Where did it go? Oops, I can't find it. Out of sight, out of mind. Until somebody who's looking for that information is able to come across it just simply on a Google search, right? This is a very doom and gloom kind of topic, and I know that's the case, and I don't always like to be the black cloud that comes into the room. But if you think about the amount of data that we have, you think about the amount of sensitive information that's on your network, how is it secured, right? And I've already said before, and I think everyone in the room would agree, it's been a blind spot for IT. IT doesn't know where all of this information sits once it gets out of the applications, right? And again, with that being 80% of the data that's on the network, it becomes unmanageable and really becomes the wild, wild west, right? Who's provisioning access to what folder? Somebody just created a new share. What sort of information are they dropping in there? Active Directory does so much for giving us ability to see who is a member of a security group, right? That's great visibility there, but the missing gap has been, how does that relate to the data? One security group can have access to thousands of folders, right? Somebody changes a job role, and you remove that right, or remove that person from that security group, where does that go? They just lost access to thousands of folders. Maybe the majority of their job, they still needed access to that data, right? We need to make sure that they're part of the correct security group, and we need to be able to visually see what data they have access to. So we talked about irrational biases. I took a shower this morning. I hope most all of us did as well. We do that every day, right? And probably don't think twice about it. But the slip risk that you take by setting foot into that shower, you're taking a risk every single day, right? But you don't think twice about it. But the second you talk about a mountain lion, the hair on the back of your neck raises up, right? And you get a little concerned about an attack. These are calculated risks that we take. And again, like I said, we don't think twice about it. I can go hop in the shower, not even think twice about it. And I probably would have just chuckled us off, but I've had a couple of close slips. Right? So fear and frequency, we talked about education space, them having issues with data that's been accidentally put to the wrong location. Large university, 146,000 student records. That's just a couple, right? Nobody should be too alarmed. A lot of SSN information being exposed. Why did that happen? Simple drag and drop. Any of us could have done that, right? But that drag and drop to the location where it went to, if that person didn't have access to it and shouldn't have had access to it, why did they, right? That could have mitigated the risk there. Okay, so they're in. And we know what happens at some point in time, whether it's the insider that's already working at your location who's got access to all of this data, or if it's somebody from the outside trying to get in. Now what? I think an interesting question to be asked is, if you're going to protect the money in a bank, how do you start, right? Where do you get started? Do you put it in the vault, or do you start by hiring the guard? I think an analogy we always use is the roadblocks don't do any good if the bank vault door is wide open, right? So let's take this from an inside approach. Making sure that we have a good idea of the data that we need to protect. Where is it? Classifying, categorizing that data. And then that next step is who has access to that data? How do we determine that the right people have access to the data? Active Directory, security groups, right? We want to make sure that there's right security groups that have the proper naming convention. Hopefully that overlays into the right folders. But you guys have probably adopted networks that have been in existence for 10, 15, 20 years, right? Best practice 20 years ago may not be the best practice today. And whatever the train of thought was that they did for the security groups back in those days may be completely opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. And then, of course, trying to determine who doesn't need to have access to them. Everyone in this room, are you guys doing the same jobs you guys did 5 years ago? A lot of no's. A lot of people change jobs, right? If you stayed with the same agency and you changed departments, did IT make sure to revoke your past rights? And was IT comfortable revoking those past permissions? Thank you, yeah. Did HR communicate that? Yeah. 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 I think it's kind of the bookends example. You've got the person who starts with an organization, and the onboarding process is that beginning bookend. This is all the permissions that you're going to have. And then when they leave the organization, right, you have the offboarding, taking the permissions away, disabling the accounts. But everything that happens in the middle, who manages all of that? How do you see what's taken place? And how do you maintain what they should have access to throughout the life of their employment? And would you guys be able to spot anything unusual? Anomalous behavior, right? I mean, this is definitely something that we talk about with the user behavior analytics. If somebody's out doing something that they shouldn't be, how do you guys know, right? And I think we in security want to think that we have great ways of knowing that. But really, and oftentimes, we're running around being, I think, reactive. Work ticket opens up, hey, we've got CryptoLocker on the network. Oh, great. Now we've got to go out and remediate a bunch of machines and figure out what we need to plug, and maybe even go back to whatever backup we need to restore from. Gets expensive, too. So how do you get all of this information, and how do you get it to make sense? It's all about metadata. It's about collecting the data about your data. That's what allows solutions to go in and give you that visibility. Obviously, I've got to be very step gingerly around what Varonis does, but it's a data governance solution, and it collects metadata about your data and allows you to extract the views to the formats that you need to see. So if you think about users and groups and that information today, Yeah, again, Active Directory, that does a great job back and forth. But if you think about how that correlates again to that data, how do you get usable views? Easy to use views as well, right? I mean, our jobs are difficult enough as it is. Let's not throw an application in that complicates it with very difficult to understand data. And being able to use the user's activity to determine if they should continue to have that access. So I think probably some of you are tasked with keeping Active Directory clean. How do you do that? If HR is not communicating with you and letting you know when people have transferred, right? Maybe somebody's taken on a new project that's going to last for 6 months. And if they're accessing a bunch of new data, how do you guys know if they should be accessing that data? Again, that metadata collected allows you to quickly extract the views that you need and be able to quickly identify if it's legitimate data access. So let's talk about ways that we can mitigate the risk, right? Global access groups. Everyone familiar with the Everyone group? Yeah? Microsoft's very secure way of making sure that everyone had access to some data and with full control, right? Come on, guys. Being able to identify where global access is available, what those groups are, and better yet, maybe even be able to have the insight to find out who created those groups, right? Why would somebody in IT create a new global access group that has elevated rights and they've got access to all of this data? Being able to pinpoint down to the individual IT admin that did that. I think people would be a little more cautious about what they go out and do on the network, right? A little more ownership on what they're doing. And how about eliminating the excessive permissions? So being able to identify where people have too much rights, oversubscribed, and being able to get an alert on that as well. Not necessarily an alert, but just saying we're identifying so-and-so, Bob, having too much access to the financial data. Bob no longer works in finance, but he still has access to this data. Why? And then again, I just kind of talked about it before, alerting on privilege escalations. If you have somebody in IT going through and elevating somebody's rights, domain admins, probably going to be okay. But if it's not, you guys probably want to know about it, right? And being able to be alerted on something like that in real time. And then, of course, looking at behavioral deviations, user behavior analytics. Like I said, it's a big buzzword right now, but what does it really mean? You've got your coworkers that you work with. You guys all probably have an average of work you accomplish in a given day, right? What does that activity level look like? Whether it's 1,000 file touches in a given day. And if somebody goes from 1,000 to 15,000 events that they generate in a day, that would be alarming for me, right? And to be able to see that and to be able to know who's doing that and what data that they're accessing probably is going to be pertinent for your security group. And then, of course, I think another one is going to be the honeypots. Anybody use honeypots today? What's that? We're setting them up. All right. And I think that actually kind of feeds into number 6, and that's to closely monitor your high-risk people and your data. I think honeypots can oftentimes help you figure out who your problem child might be on the network. Oh, I think I pushed, there we go. All right, so eliminating global access. Again, we talked about the Everyone group, being able to identify where the Everyone group has access. In a view like this, being able to double click on the Everyone group and seeing on the folders themselves where they have access. That can also be viewed from a single individual as well. Where does an individual have access to data? Tell me you guys haven't fought through that in the past, right? Trying to find out where somebody has access to data on the network. But this one here, double-clicking on the everyone group, not only are you able to identify where they have access to data, but being able to identify what level of access that they do have. I know the majority of the networks that I touch, we go in and we do this particular security test. Is the everyone group exist on their network, and where does it have access? We do see the everyone group a lot. They have list rights for traversing capabilities, and that's it, right? But we've also found a lot that still have that full control. I'd love to tell you that I always made sure to remove the full control, but I know after going back and double-checking some of my work, I forgot to remove that. But it's a simple oversight, right? And often overlooked. So in IT today, AD admins, how do you revoke those permissions and not have a huge business down situation when you start implementing these permissions, right? Or revoking some of those permissions. How would you do that today? Being able to sandbox these changes and see how it's going to impact them when you make those changes before you actually go through and do that would probably eliminate a lot of the risk that you guys have to take today, and probably a lot of those excessive phone calls when you guys do implement a change. The excessive permissions, how do we eliminate those as well? We've got to figure out a way to keep permissions clean. How are we going to do that? Again, it's in the metadata, right? What is the user's behavior? What data are they accessing? Are they behaving like other members of a security group that they happen to be a member of? And if they're not, why are they still a member, right? And so being able to go in and be able to give data owners, I'm curious to know, do you guys assign data owners to most of the data on your network? And do you guys go through the entitlement review process or the attestation reports? We've got a lot of organizations that do this on a quarterly basis. I do a lot of work with the state of Oregon. And I remember one of the folks that work up there told me that they spend upwards of 3 weeks at the end of every quarter. They've got a crazy, and it was a crazy Excel spreadsheet. And this was the entitlement review process for them. Being able to automate that, being able to send that to the data owners, and being able to get them involved in the permissions management game. IT already has enough on their shoulders, right? You guys have to make sure that the infrastructure is up and available, and whether it's the 3 nines, the 4 nines, or the 5 nines, I don't know how many you guys are guaranteeing out there, but you guys already have enough, right? Now, you guys have to worry about who has access to what data, right? If you have the data owners or data stewards involved with it, whether it's a department manager or what have you, they have a better idea of who should have access to that data. And so getting them involved, obviously it's some CYA for you guys, right, at the end of the year when somebody says, why does this person have access to the data? But also, it's keeping that list clean. So alerting on privilege escalations. How is that done today? Is it done today? You've got somebody in IT who goes rogue, and they know it's their last week on the job, but they're going to go out with a bang. Leave some stuff out there that they can still get the information after the fact. Having the ability to create these rules depending upon your organization and your organization's needs, and configuring those rules to meet your needs. So maybe it's privilege escalations. How quickly do you need to know that? Depending upon the type of data that you have, and depending upon where that data sits, you can scope that down to look at a specific folder, right? Payroll folder, ton of probably social security numbers in there, right? And it should be there. But who has access to that data? And so being able to put an alert on maybe that folder and who's accessing that folder would allow you guys to see somebody outside of payroll or accounting getting access to that data. Resonating with anybody in here? Is this stuff that you guys could use in your environment? Behavioral deviations, again, user behavior analytics. We've been doing this for a long time. Now we actually get to put a name around it, right, and actually package this right. When somebody is doing their job day in and day out, I'd like to think I'm a super productive person, but maybe 500 file touches a day, and that's probably way too much. Tomorrow I go out there and all of a sudden, it's not me, but somebody's got a hold of my account, and all of a sudden it's got 5,000 file touches. That's not me. I'm not that productive, right? But what's going on? I think it's imperative that IT has a mechanism to go in and find out when something looks a little suspicious, and then being able to drill into the details of that. Something like this, being able to click through on that day, figuring out what data is being accessed, and actually drilling down to the individual details. Forensic auditing capabilities, right? A full log. Why am I in there doing 5,000 file modifieds in a 5-minute period of time? Probably wasn't me, right? CryptoLocker, right? Or whatever variant of CryptoLocker. I think Tesla Locker is the newest one that just came out. In a perfect world, something like this happens, you get alerted on something like that. You receive the email alert, hey, Mike's out there modified 5,000 files, or actually let's make it better. Mike modified 50 files, and we enacted a script that disabled his account. We just minimize the amount of damage that I would be able to do on the network. Yeah, you're gonna have to deal with me calling into the help desk saying, hey, what'd you guys do, right? I can't get to anything on the network. But again, it's the company's data that's you're concerned with, right? And minimizing the amount of damage that ends up happening. Oh, shoot. I should have clicked through on this slide. So in a situation like this, yeah, let's say 100 files modified. Being able to be alerted when that happens. And again, being able to take that proactive step to disable that account. Would it have saved any of you guys some heartache? I'm just curious. All right, you don't have to answer the question. We've actually got a SC up in Western Canada that's really what he's dedicated his time to. As new variants are coming out, he's coming up with the required behaviors and the appropriate response script to do whatever is needed. And I would say that if you guys are curious to see if something like this has broken out on the network, we would be able to give you guys the ability to see that. I did hear somebody say that they do set up honeypots. I'm curious to know what prompted you to create the honeypot?
I got a SCADA network. We're getting ready to connect it to the internet. I sent 2 guys to Idaho to National Laboratory there for cyber.
Okay. All right. So some pretty serious information that you've got there, and you want to make sure that it's protected. Again, I think I used the payroll folder, or maybe you look at this here, CEO data. I think in the public sectors, a lot of that information is made available to the public, right? But there's also a lot of data that shouldn't be made available, whether it's taxpayers' ID numbers, maybe the salary of the taxpayer ID, right? That type of information should be locked down. But being able to put up spoof folders out there that really don't have any data, but who's hitting on those folders? And why is it that Bob's going out there trying to find out the CEO salary or the average income from everyone in this particular neighborhood? Really shouldn't be looking at that type of data. And why is he doing that? Again, that goes into point 6, and that's to be able to figure out who are your high-risk people. I'd love to tell you that the IT admins should not be the high-risk people, but sometimes they're the ones that we need to worry about, right? So we also want to be able to audit them as well, audit us as well. Make us a little more accountable on the actions that we're taking on the network. So why is it that I'm putting somebody into an elevated group, right? And then again, going back to the data classification here. We talked about SSN numbers, credit card numbers. The data's there. The data is really easy to find. And then, of course, to be able to put some context around that. Who has access to that data? And who is accessing that data? I think it's important to understand we know it's there. But what is the data that's out there? People will put their own tax returns out on their home folders because, well, it's their folder. Should it really be there? Probably not. Probably permissions being changed incorrectly could open that up to the wrong group of folks, right? Again, being able to identify where the high-risk data is at or who the high-risk people are and being able to monitor that. Let's take the payroll folder, for example. Being able to have the ability to monitor that payroll folder. Create a whitelist of people that should have access to that data. And I do say whitelist of people, not security groups, because the members of security groups can easily change, right? And if we had it set up looking at security groups, we would not see the individuals, right? So have that whitelist of people that can access that data. Anybody outside of that list accesses the information, you would be alerted on that type of behavior. I think in closing, I would probably want to say that we have the ability to give you guys a free threat assessment. What we'll do is we'll go through and take a look at identifying where the sensitive data information is on your network, showing you who has access to it, and then really look at some other things like are there empty security groups? I think those are kind of risky to have just sitting around, right? And where do those security groups have access to data? Are there user accounts that exist for people who haven't been with the organization for years? And again, HR didn't tell us. Just some of that low-hanging fruit that we can quickly help you guys identify. And also get into some more of the meat of your network and figure out, okay, what else do we need to help you guys shore up? So again, the Entisys table is over at the end of the hallway. I would highly recommend going through and taking a quick assessment. It'll give you guys the ability to actually see the full view. Again, I can't tout the software during the conversation here, but I want to at least give you guys an idea of some of the capabilities that should be out there for a data governance solution, and also have the ability to look at user behavior analytics. Any questions I can answer? Yes?
So this, is it only AD driven, or what about SQL databases and all that?
We actually use SQL as our back end, but we don't monitor SQL per se. Yeah, it's that unstructured data. And I'll say semi-structured data because we will go in and give you visibility into SharePoint and Exchange as well. And I think if you look at Exchange, the journaling and diagnostics that are built into that are maybe 6 different event types, right? We're tracking 16 different event types. So think about the Exchange admin that goes out there and spoofs a user, goes out and looks at somebody's inbox and does a quick read preview of all the messages, marks those messages as unread and walks away. Exchange isn't catching any of that information. We'll actually be able to give you the full paper trail on who did what. How about the attachments that are being sent outside of your organization to Yahoo accounts, right? Yeah. Yeah, we'd actually be able to tell you what the attachment names are and things like that. Yeah. Any other questions I can answer? I didn't generate any more questions from that. Wow. Guys, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you guys again in the future.